Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads and beyond. This is Byrne, living in Tbilisi, Georgia. I'm an American. I've been here for about 6 years now. Beyond 6 years. I'm here. Well, anyway, today we are going beyond Georgia. We're going to do the conclusion to my recent trip to Florence, Italy, which I did in January from the 2nd until the 15th, which turned out to be a great time to go because it was a great time to avoid a lot of tourists. Not all. I made a mistake. Actually, the tourist season goes till about the end of the first week. And next time, I will choose differently. And I do plan on going back to Georgia because I made friends there and it was an interesting place to be. And there's much more about the Renaissance and about Florence that I would like to discover. And so today what we're going to do is we are going to go back to Italy. And last time, if you remember, I had gotten a cold that knocked me out for a day. I was sick for a day, couldn't do anything. But by the next day, I met my friend Jill from Ticino in Switzerland. And then we went back out and we met up at the Uffizi Gallery, the place that has all the great art. So, feeling a bit better, I decided to walk over along the Arno River to the Uffizi Gallery. And of course, I was worried about the crowds, but fortunately it was a rainy day, very few people there. And what I really wanted to see was the Botticelli rooms. There were two main ones. There was another Botticelli or two scattered around. And these images are taken on the second day of my visit. I scheduled 2 days. And the reason it's the second was because I wanted to go see Botticelli without worrying about getting images of it. So here are some of my photos that I took, noticing different parts of the birth of Venus, the most famous of all the Botticellis. Some of the things I noticed were Botticelli couldn't really do feet very well, if you look closely at what I just showed you. But I also felt that it was just an absolutely incredible work of art. Now, I'm influenced by the Dutch art historian Hans Rookmaker, who says when you stand in front of a painting, especially in today's world where we are just crammed with imagery, most of it coming from screens, and we stand in front of an image and we say, after a while we go, well, what am I doing here? Most people walk into a museum, they look at a painting, you can time them under a minute sometimes. They look at a painting, they read the text, and then walk away. Now this is the Primavera, spring, and one of the things I noticed was how many flowers Botticelli painted at the feet of everyone. I never saw these in a photo before. You see them, but you don't really see them. And he spent remarkable amount of time. This was just an extra bit of imagery. I don't know who this was, but it was part of the frame of one of his works. But one of the things I noticed was that the face of the Venus was related to the faces of the Madonnas. Now this one is actually Fra Lippo Lippi, who was Botticelli's teacher. That first image there is Botticelli's, goes along with these other images, but his is clearly the superior one. This is one of his, you could call it master's thesis. This is Hugo van der Goes, if I've said it correctly. Van der Goes. And a Dutch artist. I'd never really heard of him before. What's fascinating to me, it looks like she's almost dropped the baby Jesus there. But of course, I didn't go there to look for the ironic things. I went there to understand. So, for instance, this is a triptych. If you open it up, look on the back, you'll see this angelic figure. And then go back and look and you'll see is just a fascinating work of art. And because it's new to me, I'm going to have to go back and think more about it. This is Leonardo da Vinci's Annunciation. By the way, there were several Leonardos there. I don't take images, a Giotto, don't take images obsessively. If I want images of these, I'm not going to improve upon the books and the postcards and everything like that. So what I took these images simply to share them with you. Here are some Protestant portraits of various people. I didn't take a picture of Martin Luther and Katrina von Boren. I really found this interesting, this depiction of an ancient sea monster. And I thought, there's some inspiration. But I was just fascinated. I was fascinated also just by the furniture in some of the rooms. This room was really fascinated in that the table was coordinated with a octagonal shape. And you look straight up into this. I kept thinking more and more about ceilings while I was there. It'd be easy just to walk down this hall, go look for the Leonardos or the Botticellis, and miss all the stuff that's either right next to the ceiling or on the ceiling. Part of the reason why I have my own place here and I put things on the ceiling. G.K. Chesterton said what we need is a paintbrush long enough to reach the ceiling while you're laying down, to paint on it. But there's something about art on the ceiling which is really fascinating. It's immersive. So I noticed that quite heavily. And this is I just wanted to show you a little bit. Didn't want to overwhelm you with all these things. But just to say, when you go to Europe, look at things like the ceilings. Think about why they would spend so much time painting in perhaps the hardest place of all to paint. Think about the Sistine Chapel. And of course we have portraits of people, some of them the Medicis, or they're the people who were part of Florentine culture back in the Renaissance. And these are all things that people just walk by to get to the, in a sense, Las Vegas of art, the big stuff. But I found, keeping my eyes open, I was inspired by much more than the obvious. So, one of the nice things about being in the Uffizi was being right next to the Arno River. So I could look down on it from the windows they had conveniently along the side of the river. And this view, the palace goes back to the Renaissance. This view has been seen by people for well over 500 or 600 years. And it's fascinating that I'm seeing the same view. Now, there is a place I was looking for. It's called something like the Medici Passageway. It was a secret passage over the river that goes on top of the bridge, but you don't see it while you are walking over the bridge. So I was looking for this while I was looking out to the buildings near the river. And there it is. It starts on the right-hand side, goes across. It's up above that archway and goes all the way up across. And the Medicis did this in order to be able to cross the river without running into the hordes of people that would be on the bridge. And they've just recently opened this up for people to walk across it. And I met a couple people who were in line it costs an extra, I don't know, 60 euros, so you have to think about that. But I really enjoyed just the air and the space of these windows once you got to them. The next thing I was going to do was look for the hall that had the self-portraits. And self-portraits, we tend to think, oh, well, you know, everybody's always done self-portraits, but self-portraits start with the Renaissance. The idea that just a person's face was worth painting. Now, in the 17th century, the great master of the self-portrait was Rembrandt, and there is one of his later, he's not completely old, but he's certainly later portraits. And the thing about him is he doesn't spare himself. He shows you himself as he is. And these are a couple of portraits by women from a couple centuries later doing self-portraits, which is an unusual thing. Often you have men painting women. Here is something called a painting mask. You would put this over a self-portrait, this painting on top of the painting. There is the original of the famous wild boar that people touch out in the streets. And off in the distance you see the Duomo and the Campanile. After that, I did meet my friend Jill there, and on the first of my 2 days looking at the Uffizi. And he had to go back up to Switzerland, to Ticino, the Italian part of Switzerland, but I found myself wandering back through the streets, going back to my hotel in the increasing darkness. I'm looking out of my hotel room here on the street scene below. Sometimes that's just really fascinating, and I like the way it was raining, and so the street is glowing in the lights, shining. On the next day, I decided it was time to go to the Accademia Gallery, where Michelangelo was the order of the day. And here's an early Pietà that he did, and very different than his later works. These are the unfinished pieces. They're not really, most people say they're not really unfinished, that Michelangelo left them that way. But down below, at the end of the gallery, is Michelangelo's David. And one thing I noticed is that people would put a space between him and where the bulk of the people were standing. And what I understood, being in the presence of that absolutely gigantic statue, fearful statue, impressive statue, there aren't enough words, is they would come and they would pose in the space and then quickly get out of it, almost like it was too much to be that close. Now, I think if you go in the middle of July or something, you're going to have a different relationship to David, because there'll be so many people crowding. It'll be much harder to get images of yourself. But it's so big, you're not really going to want to take selfies of yourself with David. It's just imposing. He represents, in a sense, the dream of the perfect man, the noble man. And there you see the space again. This big space, Later we'll see a lot more people in the gallery as I was leaving. But still that space remained. And like I said, someone would come into the space, they'd get someone to take a photo of them, and then they would leave the space. Now, I always am laughing. Of course, I was using a phone and a camera. But I'm saying to myself, put the camera down so you can actually see the statue. I mean, I was around that statue for about a half hour, and, I have 5 minutes worth of film. Now, at the other end, there is a room full of statues, many of them seemingly from the same studio of Lorenzo Bartolini. And a lot of them have these black dots. I've tried to figure out what those are for, but I can't quite figure it out. Someone said it's for restoration, but that doesn't explain why so many of them have the black dots on them. But this was just fascinating to me, to be surrounded by this many three-dimensional sculptures of faces. Now, Bartolini is not from the Renaissance. He is from the 19th century, and his work has a different sort of feel, definitely the Romantic period, and all these faces of the death icons, so to speak, of the Romantic age. Now I'm going back outside, and there is David again, and here is just a couple of photos. And now I am in the church, the Basilica of San Lorenzo. And now there was more here that I didn't get to because it was so full. So I was in the main body of the church, and then I went downstairs into the reliquary, which was really fascinating. So the reliquary is where you have these relics, also many things related to funerals, to burial. It's interesting how much art is connected to burial and death. Of course, these kinds of things are probably from a later period. They're a little too energetic, too emotional, probably from many of them from the Baroque era. But it's just fascinating. Clothing, vestments, images of children, bones. There's a skull at the bottom of that one reliquary. I just found that thinking about those things, the point of going to a place like Florence is not to see everything. I started thinking about how many churches and works of art I didn't see on my trip, and I can easily go back, not repeat anything from this trip, and spend the entire trip, I spent 2 weeks here, spend another 2 weeks and have no repetition at all. That's how much is in Florence. But of course, in the dark, I'm winding my way home. I have been eating good food, don't worry. But the next day, I will be crossing the river Arno again to go to the other side, the Altrarno, the other side of the Arno River, and going to the Palazzo Pitti, the Pitti Palace, which was indeed a palace which was taken over. It wasn't built by the Medici, but it was taken over by them. And I didn't know exactly. It said modern art was here, but by modern, it didn't mean what you'd get at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It meant after the Renaissance, essentially. So it was more up until the early 19th century. But just fascinated walking through these palatial rooms with real chandeliers, and many of them had candle stands within them. So here are all of these absolutely fascinating and fantastic dresses. Now, of course, many of these would be worn by women with some money, some means. But I look at this and I say to myself, what happened? What to us? Why is so much modern clothing so disposable, so, in many cases, ugly, cheap, printed with names on it? Why do we not wear things like this? And I think part of it has to do with we are in such a rush to display ourselves, particularly online, that having something which is for special occasions like this just simply doesn't fit with us. So these are some of the quote-unquote modern works. And so you can see traces of Romanticism, of Impressionism, of early 20th century work here. And this is in the larger part of the Pitti Palace. Occasionally I would see a work of art that I recognized in here, like the famous Ecce Homo, Jesus being presented to the people in the street by Pilate. And there's another Artemisia Gentileschi, whom I've run into elsewhere in here. Did I get a photo of that? No, because my goal is not to get photos of every work of art. I have books on Artemisia. Again, the point is not to go and take picture after picture after picture. The point is to feel the past, to feel the art. And that's what I was trying to do. Because if you spend all of your time with a camera in front of your face or a phone in front of your face, you're not actually seeing the work. To see the work, like to take a picture like this, I'd have to look out of the window for a while before I decide to take a photo of the window. So the photo is an afterthought. The video is an afterthought. It is not my main experience of the work. And then on the bridge, there was a license given only to gold sellers on the bridge. So the bridge was filled with all of this gold jewelry. And I am not a person who thinks about gold jewelry much. I probably prefer silver if it comes down to it. But this stuff was really fascinating to me. And I felt that it was something very special. There was something about, suddenly the lust for gold started to come out in me. So it was time after very full days. I didn't just walk over there, take a few photos and come home. I spent hours in the museum. Like I said, the main thing is to see the thing first and not to simply, put the camera between you and the object. But this is walking along the Altrano district, going back over the bridge, and then the next day I would be coming again, and this time I would be looking for the Brancacci Chapel, which has some of the most incredible Masaccio paintings. And Masaccio was one of the people from the very early Renaissance. And so I woke up, this about 9 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to get there early because I had a couple of things I wanted to see that day. And I walked through the little palazzo that was in front of the Brancacci Chapel. There it is. And I went into the chapel and just kind of sat there for a bit, looking up, getting some idea of this fantastic building. I mean, you just look at this stuff and you realize that a lot of the reason for this, they say that the coffers that for collecting money for the poor always had far less money in it than the coffers for building these buildings. And that was even the money from the poor people, because they wanted the beauty. The beauty is like nutrition. Now, in one corner of the chapel, you have all of these predominantly Masaccio paintings. And this one here, the expulsion from the Garden of Adam and Eve, is one of the most famous and shows something that up until that time had not been seen much: the feet hitting the floor. There's Dante, another of the famous Florentines. I did, in fact, read Dante's Inferno before going. And some Italian school kids on their way to school early. And again, more jewelry and window displays. Again, I'm not a person who thinks about jewelry much, but I started to think about it. What is it we do? Now, these are closed on the bridge before they've opened earlier in the morning. And here's just one of the many narrow streets you can walk down. And I got lucky because I was there. This is the second week in January. In the future, I went this time, first week of January to the 15th. In the future, I would start in the second week and go to the end of the month. I'd spend 3 weeks there. And there is the famous hog, wild boar, that people touch the nose of, thinking it will bring them back or something like that. Further in there is a place where you get lampredotto. And a friend of mine, John Luca, told me this is the spot where most of the college students get it from. Later, I ended up at the monastery of San Marco. These were all monks' cells here. And they had, what great cells to be a monk in. You have a little window for looking out, and you have absolutely fascinating art looking down at you, in a sense. But what I was really there to do this was near the end of my trip, and I wanted to think about perhaps the most controversial figure of the Renaissance era, and that is Girolamo Savonarola. And so I went into his cell, and one of the things I learned, I found a book about him there, and I went back later and read it, and I had always known, what you read if you go to Wikipedia is he burned thousands of works of art. Botticelli threw his paintings into the fires, etc. No. He did this twice, more like lessons on the 7 deadly sins. Yes, he did burn a few things. He was certainly not the first person to do this, but it wasn't thousands of works of art. He wasn't running through the streets collecting art and doing that sort of thing. He was, in fact, a very humble, but also extremely intelligent man. One of his friends was, in fact, I believe it was Lorenzo de' Medici. He was able to hold a good conversation with him about culture and art. So, Botticelli also, there's no evidence that he threw any works of art into the fire. No one can find any evidence for this. He did follow him. Now, this was a hair shirt that he wore, very uncomfortable, but he did this as an act of penance. Would I do such a thing? No. But I understand why he did. This is a picture of him being burnt at the stake. So, he is a controversial figure. Interestingly enough, the Protestants further north were inspired by him. But we have to remember, Florence was such a decadent place also at this time, that is what incensed him. And so if you hear people saying, Savonarola burnt all these works of art, it wasn't that big a deal. That is to say, it wasn't good perhaps, but it wasn't like we now exaggerate all the things from the past to make it seem like everyone was evil, when there were genuine motivations. And today, people think about getting rid of images from the past all the time because they are no longer politically correct. If you can think that thought and at the same time condemn a man who found certain things really decadent, well, good luck with that. The next day, I had seen this store on the way by, and I said, I've got to go in here and see what this is. And I'd seen some masks on the outside. It's Alice's Mask Studio. And Alice is the daughter of a man, Agostino Desi. She now owns and runs the studio and the shop. These are all masks that he makes in the Venetian style, but also in the style of the Commedia dell'arte. Also, some more contemporary figures like Pinocchio and Alice in Wonderland. But I went in here. There are literally thousands of masks here, and I was just completely impressed. Again, don't think I just walked in filming. I did not. I came back the next day and did this. There's Agostino Desi. And I've got a full interview with him over on my video about his mask shop and about masks, where they come from, what they mean, and with him and his daughter. His daughter speaks more English, and she's just as much an artist. These are some of the earliest puppets from Florence, and there are certain characters there that are only found in Florence. It's interesting how many rabbit masks I would see in there. I noticed both of you just keep working on masks.
Yes.
It's like this seems like something you do all the time.
Yes.
It's like when you're not doing anything else, you're working
Yes.
on a mask.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful. Do people ever express fear about the mask? Do they get
sure.
What
Yeah.
Why do you think they do that?
Maybe because you can find here, or when you see a mask, so many different feelings and expressions.
Also, because Pinocchio was from Florence, I interviewed them as well about Pinocchio. Alice says that now when people come into the mask store, the younger people, they come in and just simply start taking TikTok videos and Instagram shots, which is really sad. I think the younger generations have a real problem with reality, but I suggest going into that store and not taking photos to begin with, and just looking at all the masks and asking yourself questions. And if you really want to understand them, go over and watch my interviews, both about Pinocchio and the masks, two different videos. But here we are. I found the Pinocchio Museum, Pinocchio and Old Toys, and this was a really fascinating place. And in a way, this was just as fascinating to me as the Uffizi Gallery or the Galleria Accademia. This is just... Pinocchio is just as much a Florentine creation as is the Renaissance. So I highly recommend going to visit it. And it's amazing how many times Pinocchio has been adapted into different formats. Interestingly enough, the woman who was running the place had never heard of Guillermo del Toro's recent version of Pinocchio. So these are some of the old toys that were as part of the rest of the museum. This is the much larger part of the museum. And these are burattini, which is the hand puppets, the Italian hand puppets, and these are very specifically Florentine versions of them. And it's interesting to me that we now consider all of these things under the category of creepy, whereas they used to not be considered that. This was for children. People didn't give their children creepy things. They gave them things that were comical, things that were beautiful. Well, that ends my trip to Florence, Italy. It was quite a journey, and I learned so much, and I'm still processing what I've learned. It made me think about the origins of individualism, made me think about how there are cycles in art that go from abstraction to realism, and then a breakdown of realism into a different kind of abstraction, and then I suppose around again. And I'd like to thank you all for coming with me, and here's something. You should subscribe to the channel. You should use PayPal to support the channel. There's a link down below. And I also have a book on I was going to say a book on puppetry, a book of 3 puppet plays that I wrote. It's a little 50-page book. You get it for a $25 contribution to the channel. Is it worth $25? No, not now, but maybe someday, who knows. But you're supporting the channel, and I need more support for the channel. So please go ahead and help me. Or if you can't, I'll be happy if you just subscribe, like, share this video, help me get around the meager results of the algorithms. So, from Tbilisi, Georgia, this is Byrne, saying what the Georgians say when they think they'll be right back. Droebit, which means temporarily. We'll just be gone from each other a little while, and then we will meet again. Nakwamdis.